Recording.
Earth Hour, Sa'atul Arth.
L'heure pour la Terre.
Together, we created Africa's biggest hour for Earth.
Antomwe twagenda twagajovwa twagasotauga twagayimba twagahyana.
معاً أنشأنا أكبر ساعة الأرض في إفريقيا. We heard everybody's voices from across the African continent.
Nous avons entendu toutes les voix à travers le continent africain. De la terre des Maasai du Kenya
إلى شوارع مدغشقر.
Ukuzamo mifitu va Cameroon, sioko mikumulo futaba Tanzania. Ukuzako lwinga lwa South Africa, siyoke mbuwa va Namibia na Sudan.
As a symbol of unity and hope.
Comme symbole d'unité et d'espoir,
nous avons célébré l'heure pour la Terre en donnant de notre temps
pour la planète. Les communautés se sont exprimées. Les jeunes et les organisations se sont mobilisées.
Political leaders and governments gave hours. Celebrities and WWF champions gave hours. We collectively gave many hours by reconnecting with nature, restoring our natural spaces, learning more about the wonders of our planet, and inspiring others to take care of it.
En tant que continent, nous avons consacré des milliers d'heures à l'action en faveur du climat, de la nature, de la biodiversité. Si nous voulons inverser la tendance du déclin de la nature d'ici 2030 et réduire l'impact du changement climatique, plus que jamais, nous devons sensibiliser sur l'importance de nos ressources naturelles. Nous sommes la génération qui détient les solutions aux crises climatiques.
We are the generation that has the solution to the climate crisis.
Yamuliri wa kusinda kwa nyengo.
Na pamwe atuvulu kushininga.
Et ensemble,
pamwe,
together,
ndipo pamozi,
nous pouvons le faire.
Nous pouvons le faire.
Atuvulu nokuli okwetapo.
Ensemble, créons un impact encore plus grand en 2024
lors de l'heure pour la Terre.
We wish to welcome you all joining this a very, very important call today, this webinar. I want to welcome you all coming from all parts of Africa, the different countries, organizations, associations, the journalists who are joining us, the youth, all those who are trying to give the biggest hour for Earth this year. I would urge you all to put your names in the chat. Tell us where you are coming from. In fact, we are anxious to know where you are coming from, where your name, which country, which organization you are coming from. We would really like to know where you are. This is a webinar that is going to take us through 90 minutes. I will be happy to hear from you. So put your names, where you are coming from in the chat. And those who are French speaking and Portuguese, please join the interpretation channel. There's an interpretation just at the bottom of the screen. Join this channel and tell us where you are coming from, your name, your origin. And very much for having joined this webinar, for giving an hour to the Earth. This demonstrates your sacrifice, your willingness to do something to save planet Earth. So we are welcoming you once more. I want to see the name trending on the chat. I see we are 86 of us. I hope we'll be more. And I hope that you're going to enjoy our stay. We have a series of very brilliant panelists who are going to edify and take you through this webinar. So we'll be talking about climate change and ecosystem. And of course, it's coming at the time we are celebrating worldwide the Earth Hour. So we are giving the biggest hour for the planet by joining this webinar. And this is going to contribute a lot to save Mother Earth that is facing a very serious threat. So today, we are going to start with a word of remark, an opening remark from the Congo Basin Director, Dr. Martin Kabaluapa. So Dr. Martin Kabaluapa is a director for WWF in the Congo Basin. He is a holder of a PhD degree in agronomy and soils from Urban University, along with several other certificates. Martin has over 30 years of experience in agronomic research, agricultural extension, humanitarian aid, and sustainable development with international organizations such as Oxfam and the United Nations. And of course, Martin has been a former deputy director of the United Nations World Food Program in Burundi. Today, Martin is going to give us the opening remark, and we are very happy to have you here, Martin. You please have the floor. Let us listen to you as we kickstart this webinar. Thank you very much, Martin.
Thank you, Fidelis. Greetings, members of the press, dear representatives from the Africa Alliance of YMCA, Africa Scouts, and other Pan-African youth groups, development and conservation partners, and the WWF staff members. On 23rd March, African countries will join over 190 countries in giving the biggest hour for Earth as part of WWF's effort to turn a single hour into thousands and millions of hours of action and awareness to shine a global spotlight on the twin perils of nature loss and climate change. In 2023, participants from 190 countries and territories contributed over 410,000 hours, including 83,000 hours from Africa alone, representing a remarkable 90% of the planet's regions, marking it as the most significant collective effort for Earth. In a continent where the pursuit of economic development often appears to be at odds with environmental preservation, the Earth Hour movement becomes a vital channel to reach those who are not actively involved in the protection of our environment. It provides insights into simple everyday actions that contribute to the preservation of our planet. This reinforces Earth Hour's unique role in promoting hope, celebration, and an inspirational approach to conservation, climate action, and sustainability. Africa's nature and biodiversity require our collective efforts, and we need more individuals to unite during Earth Hour and dedicate 90 minutes to supporting and celebrating our diverse ecosystems. Protecting our planet is a shared responsibility, and it demands collective action from every corner of society. WWF offices across Africa have launched Earth Hour initiatives with a display of unity. One of our regional initiatives was to bring together African athletes from different sports to lend their voices and dedicate an hour for our planet. Renowned athletes such as Kenyan Olympic marathon champion Eliud Kipchoge, former Cameroonian professional footballer Roger Mila, Tanzanian footballer Juma Kaseja, Zimbabwean bantamweight champion Kudakwashe Chiwandire, Zambia women's national football team captain Barbara Banda, Mozambican competitive sailors Jose Meke and Olympia Jose Sitoe, and Mozambican volleyballer Delcio de Souza Soares are among the athletes who have committed to giving an hour for Earth. Through them, we hope to reach people who care about the environment but don't necessarily know what they can do yet. Today, we are showing the video for the first time, premiering on our Earth Hour webinar. Please play the video.
In the heart of Africa, we, the guardians of this land, rise united. Africa, we are the powerhouse of passion, and it's time to unleash that energy for our planet.
No ano passado, demos tudo por tudo durante a Hora do Planeta. 83.000 horas pela Terra. Mas este ano, estamos a apontar para as estrelas.
I will take it. Banda. This is Banda carrying the national team.
It's game time, and we are calling on you to join our squad.
Uma vitória para a natureza é uma vitória contra o relógio das alterações climáticas e a perda silenciosa da biodiversidade.
Our playbook? It's simple. Play hard, score big, and leave a legacy that spans across generations.
Bara letu ni tajiri wa bioanuwai, lipo chini ya uvamizi na ni wakati wa kulinda ardhi yetu.
Nature isn't just a teammate, it's our most valuable player in the fight against climate change. Let's show it some love.
Karibu Kilimanjaro.
The clock is ticking and you are in the final minutes. It's time to rally, to give it everything we've got.
Por isso, pegue no seu equipamento, pegue as suas botas e prepare-se para fazer história.
Il est de notre devoir de protéger la planète, le seul abri que nous avons en commun.
Sport actually should be the driver to drive this narrative, because sport is the only way to bring people together. And if the people actually come together, they can conserve the environment by actually spreading the message of conservation and planting that tree. The fulfillment is seeing that tree growing. Let us go to the forest and plant trees. And the next year we'll celebrate because our world will be green.
From the grasslands to the coastlines, every corner of Africa has a role to play.
Plant a tree, clean a beach, or simply spread the word. Every action counts in this match.
Earth Hour isn't just a moment. It's a movement, a global team effort to safeguard our home.
Haya, nini mpango wako?
How will you give your hour for Earth Hour?
Jiunge nasi Machi 23.
Join us on March 23rd, 2024.
Dê uma hora para a Hora do Planeta.
Dê uma hora ao planeta.
Dê uma hora para a Hora do Planeta.
Join us on March 23rd, 2024, and let's show the world the power of Team Earth. Give your hour for Earth Hour.
Wow. Thank you very much, Dr. Martin Kabaluapa, for that very terse introductory remark and the inspiring video we've just shared. We are going to now set the seed. And for this scene to be set, it could be done by nobody else but our own Jeff Worden, who is the Director of Conservation Impact for Africa at the WWF, at the Worldwide Fund for Nature. Jeff supports the design and implementation and monitoring of WWF conservation interventions across Africa. Jeff's research and conservation career includes work on land use change in pastoral communities, landscape connectivity, the ecology of integrated socio-ecological systems, and the use of data and evidence in decision-making for conservation and sustainable development. Today, Jeff will be talking about the relevance of doing the Earth Hour campaign, why it is important for conservation work, and how it aligns with the WWF Conservation Framework. Jeff, you are welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you, Fidelis. I think you took the words out of my mouth a moment ago when you said, wow, that was an amazing video and really a hard act to follow. I think really inspirational work. So yeah, and thank you everyone for joining us. I see the numbers of participants continue to rise. It's fantastic to see all of the interest in Earth Hour and the interest in doing something positive for our planet and collectively. Let me start by just kind of framing this in the context of our own conservation strategy here at WWF International as part of the Regional Office for Africa. There's just a couple of things I want to emphasize here before diving into Earth Hour and the opportunity that we have here for all of us to come together to give an hour for Earth. The first thing I want to highlight for us is that, we see this very much as an inclusive approach to conservation. We see our role in the region to help support that process, and this is about bringing people together to address these critical needs across the continent. Our strategy in the region, as you see here, has these 2 larger impact areas with these 7 outcome areas, which brings together our work across all of the different country offices in which we operate. And it really is designed to address 2 big kind of myths that we see in the region. One is that kind of conservation and development and the needs and aspirations of the continent cannot go hand in hand. And the other myth that nature belongs to somebody else. And this is really about ensuring that we have a vision and a roadmap for balancing conservation and development needs, and also making sure that nature really is seen as everyone's business, both from governments to private sectors to individuals to everyone that's here on this call. And you can see, for example, in our outcome number 7, an engaged society, this really is about ensuring that we collectively come together on behalf of conservation, on behalf of the planet, and therefore on behalf of ourselves and our communities. And that really takes us to this idea of Earth Hour. Next, please. Just a little bit more detail, just to give you a sense where we operate across these 14 country programs. We have these 7 priority landscapes. We work across a variety of regional programs and initiatives with these kind of critical pathways that we've identified, including, very importantly, these transformational partnerships and resilient peoples and cultures. But none of this is possible without yourselves, without the individuals and communities that come to support conservation and the planet on a daily basis. And so really this is about Earth Hour, this is about you, this is about us collectively together doing something for the planet. Next, please. Just to give you a sense of the roadmap and how we got to where we are, I think we're all aware of the challenges that we're facing in terms of the climate and biodiversity crisis. Last year was one of the hottest years on record consistently across all months. We have set ourselves a very high bar, an ambitious target of 1.5 degrees as a climate threshold that will help to ensure that we don't pass these tipping points that will impact us, not just biodiversity, but impacts us as people and as cultures, as societies. And an essential ally against this climate crisis, of course, is nature. Nature bringing its value, intrinsic value to itself, its value to us as people, but also its value as a buffer against climate change. And as part of this kind of our broader contribution and a landmark commitment to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030, that was agreed by over 190 countries, we've identified this as a critical need and a critical opportunity. And Earth Hour really is about giving back something to nature, which really has nurtured us, nurtured our societies over time, and is the critical link for us as we move forward. 2030 is only 6 years away. It really is, the time is now for us to act. And Earth Hour is really about catalyzing that collective action moving forward. Next, please. Earth Hour, what is it? It's about creating this biggest hour for Earth. This is with that 2030 goal in mind, we must all step things up. We must all come together. So join us, please, as we think about what we can collectively and individually bring to this activity of Earth Hour on the 23rd of March. Now, what does that actually mean? What does this mean for Africa? What does it mean for ourselves, our individuals, us as communities? This means us coming together. This means us recognizing the power that we have as individuals and collectively to make a difference in the world. So how can we do this? How can we help? Next, please. How can we bring an hour for Earth? How can we invest in this bank, in this investment for our future and our present? Next, please. There's many ways we can do this. This is really about identifying creative solutions and giving an hour doing something that we love. It's about pulling ourselves together, whether we're interested in fitness or food or entertainment. There are many different options for us to engage individually and collectively. We'll share a link in a moment to our site, which can help give some ideas and inspire. And this helps us also to track and to bank and to keep a record of our contributions, collective contributions to the planet. Next, please. This just gives you a few examples, whether you enjoy cinema, whether you enjoy cooking, whether you enjoy bird watching like myself, whether you enjoy just walking in the forest. This really is about taking a moment, stepping back, reflecting, and going beyond that to action and engaging and really stepping forward on behalf of ourselves and our communities and our planet. So please join us. Check out our website here. Please, on the next slide, you can see opportunities for sharing on social media. And also for, again, I encourage you to log into the site here and to bank an hour for Earth, get some inspiration, and join us all in this collective action for ourselves and for our planet. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Jeff. I think it's hotting up here. I would encourage the Portuguese and French speakers to please go to the interpretation channel. Those who speak Portuguese and French, please, we have interpretation services, so we wouldn't have any problem. I see where people have joined from all over the continent. Very encouraging indeed. And in fact, it is getting more and more interesting because this time around, we are going to zoom into panel discussions. I will have a clutch of brilliant panelists, 4 of them, who are going to talk on various policy issues that WWF has been leading on the continent. And the first of these panelists is called Durrel Halleson. Durrel Halleson is Policy and Partnership Africa at WWF Regional Office for Africa. He's an experienced professional in policy and development related fields with a demonstrated history of working in non-profit and research organizations. He is skilled in research, policy analysis, strategic planning, international development, and public policy. I have some very tough questions for you, Durrel. I hope it's not going to be too tough, but I think it's the kind of question I would like to ask someone with your experience. Durrel, what do you see as the biggest wins for Africa at the last COP28? And please share with us your perspective on some of the key issues from the negotiations. How can WWF work with partners to ensure global policy processes deliver on Africa's expectation? And what do you think Africa should do to push so we get into COP29? As we are moving into COP29, what do you think Africa should do, Durrel?
Thanks so much, Fidelis. And again, let me echo my thanks to the WWF communication team for putting this together and for those who are joining us. Yeah, quite interesting questions you put there, and yeah, they're tough, but I think they are the kind of questions that help us to get into what we as a continent are doing and how do we deliver on not just our conservation objectives, but our development objectives. Because remember, we are in Africa, and one of the biggest challenges we have as a continent is what kind of development do we want for the continent? And I think the COP in general are key opportunities and the climate COP in particular are key opportunities where the world come together to address the causes and the growing impacts of climate change. And for Africa, sorry, I hope it's not me.
Please go ahead, please.
Yeah, and as you all know, Africa is one of those countries that have been considered as most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. We've seen it over the years. We've seen, and I think someone was saying this morning that we thought last year was the hottest. Last year, September was the hottest month for quite some time in the last one century, the last century. But we think as we move ahead year in, year out, we get more hotter years. And this year we're all seeing that it's getting hot. But COP28 came, and I think I would like to zoom in on the COP28 and to answer your questions. Was considered as a very critical COP because it was the first COP which was called the COP of implementation. You know, we're building from the Paris Agreement in 2015, which was COP21, and the COP27 that took place in Africa, considered the African COP in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, did provide some guidance. And so moving to COP28 that took place in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, we're looking at how to bring together all those issues that were important to a continent like Africa. But I think more importantly, before I even go to the big wins or the big issues that came out of the negotiations, was that the COP28 produced what we now refer as the first, the COPs of first. So it was the first time at a COP that on the first day of the COP, we had a big announcement around the loss and damage fund, operationalizing the loss and damage fund. This is unprecedented. It was the first time at the COP where we had the word fossil fuel, an agreement to phase out of fossil fuel, to transition away from fossil fuel. And it was the first COP where we had a health day looking at the linkages between climate change and health with a declaration that came up. And for Africa, COP28 presented another opportunity to negotiate on its main priorities. And going to COP28, Africa had key issues they wanted to see. They wanted to see issues around climate finance, around the global stock take, around strengthening adaptation actions, on the need to operationalize the loss and damage fund that was accepted or agreed at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. What kind of energy transition do we want for the continent, and the need for the COP or the parties to take into consideration Africa's special needs and circumstances. And I want to say that these issues, these priorities for the continent, were negotiated and agreed and became known as what they call the African Common Position, which was agreed at the African Ministerial Conference that took place in Addis Ababa, but also re-echoed and reiterated at the African Climate Summit that took place in Nairobi in September. So you see that this is a position that has been agreed by our leaders to COP. Now, if I should come to what were the big wins, I don't know if I should call them the big wins, but what we consider as a big issue that came out of this COP. One, on climate finance. And like I said, that Africa going to the COP was looking at how to ramp up financing to finance to help it cope on the effects of climate change. The negotiations on climate finance were expected to deliver on the $100 billion pledge that were made by developing countries in 2009 at the COP in Copenhagen. Unfortunately, we did not see this come true. We were expecting to have what they call a new collective goal on a new qualitative goal on finance. This also was not achieved, but it was pushed for COP29. So already I'm looking at what are we looking at about COP29 in Azerbaijan. So the new collective goal on climate finance was pushed for COP29. But however, despite these drawbacks, we saw some interesting financial pledges that were made. Like we had almost $3.5 billion pledge that was made to replenish the Green Climate Fund. We had $134 million that was pledged to the Adaptation Fund, and we had $792 million to the Loss and Damage Fund. But I would say all these pledges and all this money I'll consider them as a drop in the ocean, looking at how much we need to curb or to face the effects of climate change, right? So it's good to have something on the table, but this is inadequate. When we talk about the effects of climate change and looking at climate finance, we're talking about trillions and not billions. And what we had at COP were billions. We appreciate that there was total 85 billion that came out. Can it help us resolve the issues of climate change? I would say no. So that's one thing we'll be looking at as we go into COP 2029. And I did already mention about the operationalization of the loss and damage fund. The loss and damage fund, I think it's a big thing. It's one thing that Africa wanted. We got it. It was agreed. An initial pledge of $792 million was put on the table to help the fund run. But there's still some sticky issues that are still to be discussed, like the composition of the board, where the fund should be lodged. Africa actually denies or rejects any proposal to house that fund at the World Bank, because the thing, once you house it at the World Bank, it comes with some conditionalities around which could be considered as debt. And this, Africa said, grants or financing coming to the continent should not be debt tied. There should be grants, they should be free from any condition. And so Africa is really looking at putting this fund somewhere where it could really help to push things ahead.
You have 2 more minutes, Durrel.
Yeah, thanks. I'll wrap up quickly. And then we had food, and I think Nancy is on the panel who will speak to the issues around food. Adaptation was another big thing that came out from the COP. And Africa is one continent that really is fighting for adaptation, because that is something that is really tied to its development, its development trajectory. Energy transition, like I said earlier, we saw it happen at COP. For the first time, we had an agreement to transition away from fossil fuel. But what are the opportunities for Africa in the renewable energy space? That's something we'll be looking at as we go into COP29. And now you did ask the question, I'm sorry, I think I'll end there, on how do we partner with how do we collaborate or work with other partners to ensure that global policy processes like this do deliver on Africa expectation. I would say WWF has...
Hello. Your time is up. Please wrap up, Durrel.
Yeah, I'm wrapping up. Sorry. So I was saying WWF has a very strategic partners in the continent, like the African Development Bank, the African Union Commission, the different regional economic communities. And we do work with these different institutions to make sure that we bring in our conservation narratives to tie in with the development objectives of the continent. And that's what we saw at COP28 through different site events, and also how do we ensure that we build a narrative in the continent that speaks to the issues that we're facing. So thanks, and sorry for going over time.
Thank you very much, Durrel, for that very brilliant presentation. We are going to move to the next speaker. His name is Mweene Chaambwa. And Mweene is a senior specialist, global policy and advocacy, WWF Africa, or WWF International, sorry. Mweene is the senior specialist, global policy advocacy for WWF International, with massive experience in policy, strategic partnerships, evidence-based advocacy, and government relations. Currently a member of WWF International Global Policy and Advocacy team. Mweene, and I would urge you to speak slowly so the interpreters can get us. I have some questions for you, Mweene. The very first, there are 2 questions. Colombia will be hosting the CBD COP16 later this year. So how are African countries doing in general on reviewing, updating their NBSAP? NBSAP is National Biodiversity Strategy for the different countries. And how do we ensure that the Global Biodiversity Framework implementation process in the countries is inclusive? That is to say, it's involving CSOs, private sectors, communities, and indigenous people. Mweene, please tell us.
Well, thank you so much, Fidelis, and thank you so much to everybody who managed to join us today in this very important meeting that we have. First, allow me, Fidelis, to give a background in where we're coming from in terms of the negotiations that have taken place within the realm of the CBD. The NBSAPs that we're talking about are coming from the landmark decision that was passed in the tail end of 2022, where 196 parties, countries party to the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity came together to agree on a very important framework that is going to help in bridging the gap. A framework that is going to help to, first of all, halt and then restore the integrity to halt nature loss or halt biodiversity loss, and then restore the integrity of the ecosystems. So the implementation phase, after the landmark adoption, of course, in Montreal in December 2022, from 2022 to 2030 is an implementation phase. And as a requirement, countries, of course, that are party to the convention, the GBF, the CBD convention, parties that are signatory to the agreement, the GBF agreement, will come down to earth to look at what does the framework itself mean for their countries, for their respective countries. Because the GBF, which is the Global Biodiversity Framework, has got global targets. So these targets have to be, brought down to earth at country level to look at what do they mean for each particular country in terms of those particular targets. How do they contextualize based on what the country is going through, and also based on how ambitious that particular country can be. So the next COP, which is COP 16, the landmark decision to adopt the GBF was done at COP 15 in Montreal. The next COP, which is COP 16, is going to be held in Colombia, in a beautiful city of Cali. And the aim, the objective of that particular convention, the particular meeting, is to ensure that countries look at their NBSAPs in terms of to discuss how ambitious the NBSAPs that country would have submitted, are. So the discussion will be around ambition in the NBSAPs, in the plans, because the way countries are going to implement the GBF is that they are going to come up with plans. And these plans will contain national targets, because I talked about global targets, which are going to be scaled down to national targets. And in this, the process of national target setting is what is going on right now. Between the time actually of adoption and COP16, countries which are of course party to the CBD convention are busy looking at revising their NBSAPs to align it with the newly adopted KMGBF. And this particular process based in Africa, looking at what's happening currently, I can say that the picture isn't very impressive, but also the picture I can say is not very demotivating. I think that we have different arrays of countries that are advanced in as far as revising of the NBSAPs are concerned. Some countries are still doing consultations. We have a number of countries within Africa, of course, that are still looking at roadmap and also pondering on where to go. So we have countries in many sections of the implementation radar. One thing I have to mention here is that this particular process is government-led. So governments decide in terms of their roadmaps, together with of course the various stakeholders that government might want to involve in this particular process. So I just wanted to mention that it's definitely government-led, and therefore within Africa continent, countries at various stages of implementation. In terms of how we want this particular NBSAPs to be inclusive, the inclusivity of the NBSAP, I think our approach is that we would like to see a whole of government and whole of society approach being taken in the first of all revising of the NBSAP and the implementation of the NBSAP, because this is a plan. Because the implementation of the GBF is a cocktail will include a cocktail of a lot of things. So talking about the NBSAP, the revision of NBSAP, which is a plan, a master plan for the country. But then there's also an aspect of other activities that, of course, beef up these particular plans, issues to align, of course, policies that are existing policies within countries to speak to the NBSAP that the country will have adopted. and also the NBSAP itself to speak to various other laws that exist within those particular countries. So it's an array of activities that take place within that particular country. So what we would like to see in terms of inclusivity process within this particular process is that there is a whole of government and whole of society approach being taken in the revising of the NBSAPs, and then also in the implementation process, and also monitoring and evaluating the evaluation of that particular plan that will have been developed. By whole of government, I mean that traditionally, what we've seen in the past is that the Ministry of Environment, or whichever ministry which is focal point to the CBD in that particular country, will take up lion's share in the planning, in the implementation, and also in the revising of the NBSAP, sometimes overlooking other key stakeholders within government to start with. Because within government, we have ministries that are very, very, very relevant to this particular framework. For example, the Ministry of Finance and National Planning, extremely key in the biodiversity, in the GPF. The Ministry of Youth, for example, ministry that is in charge of the youth, is extremely key. Ministry in charge of the indigenous people and local communities who are the owners of the resources is extremely key. You're talking about every other ministry, of course, that is relevant.
When you have 2 more minutes.
Thank you so much, Fidelis, to the GPF. So the process of ensuring that ministries are mapped up within the government to ensure that no agency, no ministry within that particular government is left behind in as far as the planning of the NBSAP and the implementation of the NBSAP process. In terms of whole of society approach, we're looking at non-state actors, inclusion of non-state actors in the planning and implementation. We're talking about the CSOs, we're talking about the youth. I talked about the indigenous people and local communities, the traditional leaders. I think these are the people that are close to the and custodians of the resources that we're talking about, the ecological infrastructures, and therefore including them in the planning and implementation process of the GPF will result into a good plan for the country that is going to be well implemented by everybody in that particular country. So I end here and wish you a very happy Earth Hour for 2024. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you very much, Mweene, for that incisive one. I would urge participants, please, you can put your question in the Q&A chat box. If you have any question, we're going to have a Q&A at the end, but those who already have some questions, please put it in the Q&A. We're going to take those questions when we get to the question and answer session. Thank you very much. So we are going to move on to our next speaker. She's called Nancy Rapando. Nancy is a sustainable agriculture specialist with broad experience in Africa in program management, policy analysis, technical advisory work. She has worked with diverse actors across East, Central, and Southern Africa on agriculture, value chains, natural resource management, climate change, and food and nutrition security. Nancy, I would like to know from you, in the Global Biodiversity Framework, we see food cutting across several of the targets, and it is well articulated in Target 10, that's sustainable agriculture and aquaculture, and Target 16, which is sustainable production. From an African perspective, Nancy, how is WWF African Food Features initiative contributing to ensuring that Africa remains food secure and also delivers on the Global Biodiversity Framework through an in-country process, such as National Biodiversity Strategy Action Plans and the NDCs, the National Determined Contributions? Bring in Africa ecological feature evidence. So Nancy, we want to really hear from you. We're talking about food here. And please tell us, how does this connect?
Thanks a lot, Fidelis. Of course, my time comes when it's even lunchtime in one of the African countries. And thanks to my seniors, Mweene and Durrel, who really talked about the global processes. But now let me bring all this home on how these global processes are actually landing down on the ground into practice and policy. Just to give a background on the Africa Food Future Initiative that I lead, this is an African initiative that is reconciling biodiversity conservation and agriculture development, and we aim at putting Africa on a food transformation pathway that protects biodiversity and guarantees resilience to climate change. I do agree that a number of targets really lie at the heart of food system transformation and biodiversity conservation. But let me start with the two that Fidelis, you've just told me to talk about. One of them is target 10. Target 10 actually talks about enhancing biodiversity and sustainability in agriculture, aquaculture, fisheries, and forestry. And in defining this target, it is clear that we need to deal with issues around sustainable use of biodiversity, application of biodiversity-friendly practices, sustainable intensification, and even goes further to mention approaches like agroecology. And for us, under the Africa Food Future Initiative, agroecology is actually at the heart of what we are doing, is actually one of our 3 delivery pillars. And just to say that agroecological nature positive practices that we are promoting around our conservation areas tend to go beyond the farm to protect landscape level biodiversity. Indeed, in Africa, we know we have a challenge of soil health. We need those soil microorganisms, we need the pollinators, but also we need to protect the entire wildlife that is actually threatened by agricultural practices. Looking at aspects like sustainable intensification, one of our challenges in Africa to our conservation efforts is that agriculture and food production is really threatening our landscapes because of a lot of conversion. And as we convert these landscapes, what is happening is that we are losing a lot of space that could have harbored biodiversity. And so in doing this, and WWF, we ensure that our work on agroecology is similarly supported, guided by land and water use planning and management. And this actually aims at ensuring sustainable and equitable resource use. Just to say that we are working with the landscapes to actually develop agroecology models, looking at approaches like permaculture and agroforestry, getting integrated at farm level. But I also want to allude to the fact that to bring the GBF home, a number of African countries are already developing agroecology strategies and policies. Tanzania has been the front runner. They already have an organic, an ecological agriculture strategy. Kenya is developing one. I was speaking with Zimbabwe and Zambia in the last 2 weeks. They are really at advanced stages. Definitely Uganda has been ahead with key policies on organic agriculture, and they're now developing agroecology strategies. So this should tell you how Africa is very ready to implement the GBF by developing such critical policies. Just to talk about target 16, that talks about enabling sustainable consumption choices to reduce waste and overconsumption. And it is clear that we need to ensure that people are encouraged and enabled to make sustainable consumption choices. But a critical aspect of this is to ensure we are reducing the food footprint by really working on reducing waste in our consumption systems. But really, in a continent like Africa, where hunger is prevalent, talking about food waste can actually be viewed as a paradox. But indeed, both the challenges of underconsumption and overconsumption are still a challenge in Africa. But as WWF, we've tried to map out which are the critical hotspots of food waste. And we're looking at schools, we're looking at urban centers, we're looking at markets, we are also looking at hotels as critical hotspots. And we know that circularity is the best option. We are working with hotel stakeholders. We are also working with waste management stakeholders to actually see how we take back this waste to build our soil, our nutrients in the soil. So we already have very good examples from Kenya and Zimbabwe where we are working on circularity and also working to support hotels to develop menus that reduce on food waste. But just in addition to Target 10 and Target 16. We have Target 7 that is working on reducing pollution to levels that are not harmful to biodiversity. We know that our landscapes are actually areas where we have a lot of agrochemical flows, and some of them are dangerous to biodiversity. And this is one of the reasons why we are promoting agroecology, because agroecology deals with using natural systems to actually protect the soil and also protect our crops against pests. So looking at an agroecological approach would really ensure that we actually reduce these dangerous chemicals, but also as WWF, we are part of critical dialogues that are looking at phasing out the dangerous subsidies and also phasing out the dangerous agrochemicals. Just to say that, what are we doing as WWF to actually support these processes? I would like to say that we are developing evidence to support decision makers at continental level and at country level. Our recent publication, dubbed the Africa Ecological Food Futures publication, is actually looking at providing evidence on how agriculture is threatening our ecosystems. And the publication actually goes ahead to identify a number of environmental drivers and socioeconomic drivers like urbanization, population, and how all these are actually affecting biodiversity. So in the spirit of giving back more hours to Earth, I will actually stop here and say that we are working at the nexus of food and conservation as WWF with a major aim on ensuring that food production does not continuously threaten biodiversity, and that we need to respond to the hunger situation in Africa without impacting on conservation efforts. Thank you so much, Fidelis. Allow me to stop there.
Thank you very much, Nancy, for being this test and for respecting time. I hope the thought for food is increasing now. Thank you very much. We are going to move to our next speaker. She is a lady called Ritah Kyategeka. Ritah is head of policy, advocacy, and communications at WWF Uganda. She has been at the helm of the No Plastics in Nature campaign over the years at WWF. She has managed to mobilize over 5,000 Ugandans to take to the street to speak against single-use plastic pollution. This culminated into a presidential directive to reinforce the ban on microplastics. So Ritah, sorry, you are the plastic woman here. And I have some questions to ask you also. I think as we approach the conclusion of negotiation for the global binding treaty aimed at combating plastic pollution by the end of 2024, it's evidence that national actions will be pivotal alongside this global endeavor. Can you elaborate on your engagement with government and other stakeholders to ensure that your country's unique circumstances are considered in the treaty's outcome? Specifically, how do you envision to treat contribution to the establishment of a sustainable circular economy for plastics in your country? Ritah, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mweene. And thank you, Fidelis. I would be doing a disservice to everyone if I don't start by mentioning that our plastic journey, our journey against plastic pollution, started as our campaign. And one of those afternoons, I entered one of the offices in the land, and I was mobilizing them to please switch off their lights in commemoration of Earth Hour. And they put me aside and said, well, for how long shall we continue to do actions? Because they have said do actions as opposed to us having solutions to our own problems. So that caused me to come back and sit with my team and do an analysis and say, okay, what is Uganda's problem? And one of Uganda's problems, amongst others, in regard to nature conservation, is plastic pollution. So we mobilized people. And yes, we were over 3,000 people who took over on the streets of Kampala to speak against plastic pollution. But we were doing that at a time where we were communications people. I'm majorly a communications person, and people were asking us the tough questions, and we kept on referring them to the Environment Agency, that is the Uganda the National Environment Management Authority. And when the pressure increased, they got back to us and said, you guys, you have raised pressure for us. How are we going to proceed? So at that point, the country was at zero. And I'm glad to say that today, because of what we did, we have in place the National Strategy for Plastic Circularity in Uganda. And this is a framework for guiding sustainable plastic management and to ensure a health and safe environment for all. Now, why is this very important for the international negotiations for the global treaty? If you don't know where you are, it becomes very hard for you to tell someone that this is where I want to go. You will go at any direction. But because now we know where we are, because the strategy is deliberate, it is visionary, and it is a commitment by our country that it is going to address the management of plastics. I think that is the first win for us. We go into these negotiations when we know what we want, we know how big our problem is. Maybe just to give you a snapshot into the strategy has strengthened the knowledge base for plastic sources, pathways, accumulation areas, and is also tracking information related to plastic pollution in order to inform policy decisions. So now this tells you that when we go to the negotiation table, we know the direction we want our country to take. And I'm hoping that this is the situation for most of the African countries that are not as lucky to have plastic bans yet. I can cite you another example of how we are engaging. Uganda co-sponsored the draft resolution by Rwanda and Peru, which called for an intergovernmental negotiation committee. And this one was given the mandate to start the negotiations for the legally binding global treaty. And we have one of our Ugandans there. So at the place where we are now, we can smile and say, yes, our has been a success in our country because of how far it has brought us. You point to another issue of how is this treaty going to help address the plastic challenges in Uganda and Africa as a whole. So we know that if this treaty is in place, then it's going to help us establish the sustainable circular economy for plastics, not just in Uganda, but in African countries. We all know very well that Africa only produces 5% and consumes only 4% of the total global plastic volumes. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the reality that we are facing with. So this simply means that most African countries are net importers of plastics. And yet the existing collection, sorting, and waste management infrastructure cannot cope with this flood of plastics entering the continent. So the success of this treaty hinges mainly on inclusivity and collaboration, ladies and gentlemen. So firstly, the treaty should encompass measures across the entire life cycle of plastics, that is from production to disposal. That is the only way it will work for us. And this simply means that implementing a binding and specific global regulations such as bans. We can also talk about phase outs. There are some plastics that need to go off the market. We can also talk about the phase downs, because we know that we cannot just wake up and say no to everything. So we need to also have phase downs on the problematic plastic products and chemicals, and as well as requirements for product design that are going to prioritize reuse and facilitate non-toxic recycling. We have so many people who are saying we are recycling, but we don't even know whether those recycled products are not toxic. So that's what we want this global treaty to do for us. And without such regulations, I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that there is a risk of overburdening the economy with unmanageable amounts of plastic waste, particularly if only the downstream waste management approaches are pursued. So therefore, it is critical, in my opinion, to invest in upstream strategies, such as redesigning packaging and products to be more sustainable, but also to prevent the system from collapsing. So, ladies and gentlemen, the global treaty is here for us, and we need to ensure that we are working with our government negotiators. That is very important. So that they give us a document that will create a framework that promotes the production, the use, and the disposal of plastics in a manner that minimizes environmental harm, maximizes the resource efficiency, and supports transition towards a circular economy model, particularly for our African countries. As I conclude, let me just say that for the treaty to work for a country in Africa, it must come out as strong, not just on safe circular economy, one that leaves no one behind, not only saving jobs. We've had arguments of we cannot do away with plastics because of the jobs issue. So that must also be addressed. But it must also ensure that the informal sector is recognized and compensated for their role in recycling collections. We all know that in our countries, we have these people who are picking these bottles we are throwing on beaches, on the streets, who are trying to bring us options, packaging options. But I can assure you that the pay is so bad. So we need to also create decent jobs for the people who are in the reuse industry. We must reverse the logistics and alternative material chains. We must reward that whole life cycle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ritah. That was brilliant. And I want to thank all the 4 panelists who have done an extremely good job. Now is the time for us to listen to you, our participants, those who have decided to sacrifice their time, their pleasure to take part in this webinar. We have requested that you put questions in the question and answer function down under the more panel. And for those who want to ask questions directly, please raise your hand, indicate, and you'll be given the floor to put your question. We are still waiting for more questions to trickle in. I have seen a lot of industry at the level of the chat box, and I've realized that we have people coming from all over the continent, African continent. We want to thank you for being there. So it is time to hear from you. After having listened to the panelists, we are anxious to hear from you. We are ready to take your questions. So please indicate and you'll be given the floor. Yes, we are waiting for your questions. So indicate with a show of hand and you'll be given the chance to ask your question directly. And we will ensure that you get the response as much as we can from our end. This has been a very inspiring webinar with the policy team of WWF giving you an insight of the work we are doing on food, on plastic, on the different COPs, how we are integrating our WWF vision into these different policy moments. So we are waiting for your question.
Fidelis, we have Karen. Maybe you can start with Karen, who has raised her hand to ask her question.
So Karen, please ask your question.
Thank you very much, Fidelis. I'm Karen Nyemba, a community conservation officer for Frankfurt Zoological Society of Zambia in Mpika, specifically
We've lost you. I see 3 people have raised their hands. Apparently we've lost Karen. Egbe Ferdinand. While we wait for Karen to join again, maybe Egbe, you can ask your question. Sorry, Karen.
I got cut, I think.
Okay, Karen, please go ahead, ask your question. Sorry.
Okay, so my question was on policies and frameworks that are made in conservation. Do we ever get to consider the people on the grassroots, the people that are affected? If we are to talk about conservation of natural resources or management or sustainable management of natural resources, we are talking about the communities that are actually living in these areas where we want conservation to work. How can we ensure that as we formulate policies and frameworks, we get to involve people at the grassroots? Because I feel most of the times when these policies are formulated, the people on the grassroots are never really considered. How can organizations in conservation as well as governments collaborate in ensuring that these policies actually speak to the different communities that are supposed to actually implement various conservation activities?
Thanks very much, Karen. I think we would answer that question. How does the policy speak to the people who are supposed to be impacted? That's what Karen wants to know, and we're going to give our panelists the opportunity to provide an answer. So please, let's hear from our panelists.
Yeah, thanks, Fidelis. If I could take that, and then my other colleagues could come in, and I think I have my our leadership is here as well that can speak. Jeff and Martin can also please come in to support some of the things I'm saying. And Karen, I think the question you raised is quite important. But you know, and policy have two ways of working. One is it's either informed by what is happening at the grassroots, so we're responding to a particular issue to solve that. So if you look at what is happening at the climate space, for instance, we all know we're facing an existential problem, which is the climate change impact, and we need to solve it. And the COPs are one of the ways we use as platforms we use to discuss that. But if I bring it to the level to what you're discussing, which is what is happening at country levels, I think for us as conservation organizations, most of our organizations have their presence in the field. They work with communities. I think the first thing is, what are the issues we're trying to resolve? And how do we cascade, or how do we ramp up those issues to bring them to the notice of our policymakers and decision makers? So I think the first thing is we need to gather enough evidence, but also at the level where those policies are being made or being discussed, we need to ensure that the communities are involved. I know in some countries, especially in the Anglo-Saxon countries, there's a whole process, the public participation process, the public hearing processes for different bills and acts. That is where the communities have to voice, provide their, give their own, how do I put it, articulate their issues, make sure that those issues are taken into consideration. And also, where you have instances of either through your county council, your counties or your regions, also to talk with them, get them to be part of the problem you're trying to resolve. So get the parliamentarians to the field, get the legislators to the field, so that they hear directly from the communities, and that is a way you inform what kind of policy that is beneficiary to the communities. I don't want to go into so deep into the issues, but I think that's the one way I think we could involve communities and make sure that those affected by those policies all are involved in both the making and the implementation.
Thank you, Durrel, for that response. We are going to take the next question. I think Yoyi has a hand raised. Please, Yoyi, if you are still standing by, please can you ask your question? We'll take 2 questions and then we'll let the panelists provide response. I see Yoyi first, and then John Paul, could follow suit.
Thank you. I think that I can go on. Yeah, thank you. My name is Toyi. Toyi.
Toyi. Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for the event. I'm very interested in it, and I follow the very interesting with in very interesting mood. Yes, I'm a student in Masters of Economics applied on environment and climate change here in DRC at the University of Chilican Africa. Yeah. My question is directly according to the panelists who was very important giving something, and I would like to make a context according to the policies and the actions that can be made in the climate change context of the region. My opinion is about how can policies and actions can be in accordance in the context of regional economics and change climate movement. So that is I want to know because according to the context of the common pool. Yes, we have a certain pool in common in the great regions, and when climate change context affects one country, maybe another one is directly touched by the impact. How can civil society and the government both link together efforts in order to make action to regulate and in order to prevent that common legacy we have as a common pool. Thank you. I think that this is my only question I would like to
Thank you very much, Yoyi. We'll take another question from the second question from John Paul. Are you still on, please? Yoyi, thank you very much. We're going to get back to you with the answer.
Thank you.
Okay, John. Chung, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. My name is Chung John Paul from Cameroon, a master's student from the University of Bamenda, Cameroon. So my question goes thus. What is the relationship between WFP and African governments, like in their policies and implementation? Because when you see the industries in Africa, their level of operation and most of these industries, when they import their materials, like in the agro sector, you see most of the chemicals or fertilizers they bring from these foreign industries into Africa. What is WFP working with African government to see there is a check in their contents of their products in the agro sector? And most of these logging companies, when they come, they work with the communities. Most of these African governments, what is the relationship with the implementation between the communities affected? Because some of these logging companies, their operation centers around local communities, and there is no follow-up and implementation. So what is the relationship between WWF and African head of states and African governments to follow up the implementation of their projects in Africa countries to curb this aspect of climate change? Because I don't really see it. The relationship is not there. So I want to know the level of follow-up between African governments and WWP. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would provide response to the two questions. First from Yoyi, he wants to know how African countries are synergizing with regard to the impact of climate change. It can affect two countries at a time. What are the actions that they can take to ensure that the impact is mitigated? So that is the first question from Yoyi and Chong. We want to know what WWF World Food Program, I believe, is doing to check the chemicals that are important into the country, and what is the government doing in order to check what logging companies are doing with regards to the impact the activities are having on communities. So please, panelists, we have less than 5 minutes for the question and answer. So please, Vitesse, let's hear from you.
Okay, thanks, Fidelis. Let me just take John's question on the issue of, I will not talk as WFP, but I'll say, let me talk like WWF and what can be done together with governments to actually reduce the proliferation of the dangerous chemicals. We know one of the areas that we really need to work on is to start understanding the residue levels of some of these chemicals. Like, we are able to do tests of the foods in the market and be able to know if the residue levels are too high, and be able to advise the government on what type of chemicals need to be removed. Already countries are working to develop a list of accepted and the not accepted chemicals in the countries, which is also possible. But what we are also saying is that whatever is banned is dangerous in Europe should be dangerous in Africa too. And so this list of agrochemicals that are dangerous should be something across the globe, and not seeing that something has to be banned in one continent and not in the other. So these are some of the critical aspects that we are working on, but the CSO voice is very critical, giving evidence, but also advocating so that our standards, our organizations working on standards, the government sectors working on standards, the government sectors working on certification of some of these agro dealers need really to be checked so that we don't have a challenge of what is entering into the countries. But another critical area is at the point of entry. We might be checking the official points of entry, but we're also having problems with transboundary systems where some points of entry are quite areas of leakage, and that becomes areas through which the bad chemicals are actually crossing. And as WWF, through our transboundary operations, we are able to work with the transboundary organizations to actually develop the right policies to check on this. So thank you so much for that question. I will actually leave Toy's question to my other colleagues who are dealing with the climate processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Do we have any other panelists providing response?
Yeah, Fidelis,
yes, go ahead. Just be test as much as possible.
Yeah, yes, thanks. And I think to the question from Toy on what is Africa doing in terms of the climate vulnerability, I think Africa has kept negotiating. I think it's one of the few regions in the climate space that negotiates as a bloc. So we negotiate, our positions are developed as the common African position. And that is what is, when we go to negotiation, we discuss that. We discuss as a continent. We have what we call the African Group of Negotiators, which is so no country discuss on its own. You could have bilaterals, but when the issues come to the table, it's discussed as an African continent. And that is one way we try to make sure that we ramp up enough support, and even in terms of the fallouts that might come from those discussions, which unfortunately are not yet there, like I said in my presentation earlier on the climate finance, which we are not yet there, but we believe that as a continent, we keep working together, we can deliver on that. And Africa's key focus, like I said earlier, is on adaptation, because we think adaptation is closely linked to our development aspirations. So since there's not much time, I won't want to go in. But there was a question on the chat box on the transition, on energy transition, and what can Africa do? I think I'll just take a little time, just 1 minute, to say that we already have problems with energy in Africa. We have 600 million people without access to modern energy. And what we're doing, or what we advocating, Africa is advocating, is that rather than what are the opportunities in the renewable energy space? And we are looking at those opportunities in line with the availability of critical minerals that are available in the continent. If you take, for instance, DRC up to Zambia, we have the copper belt. How does Africa leverage its critical minerals that are needed for those transition, for this energy transition, so that those industries, like the car industries, come to, we have them located where the industries are, where those minerals are, and that way it doesn't just it's not about GDP and growth, but it's also about employment. So I don't know if I provided some clarification on that, but we can take it offline.
Thank you, Durrel. I see we have just 7 minutes left for this webinar, and I see a number of questions in the chat box. I don't know, maybe we can take one before we get the closing remark from Dr. Martin Kabaluapa, Congo Basin Director. There is Philip Kihumuro from WWF Uganda. Well, I wouldn't want to take a WWF staff. There is a chat, something from during the COP27 discussion, the phase out of fossil fuel was a prominent topic. However, considering Africa's vulnerability to climate change and the increasing influx of second-hand vehicles to the continent annually, how practical is this transition? Moreover, with limited infrastructure hindering the adoption of alternative sources like solar energy, is there sufficient financing pledged to address this challenge? So maybe we can provide an answer to this question. I will apologize to those whose questions we've not been able to provide answer. I think it will be provided directly to you. So don't worry, Philip. We will get back to you. Who can take this question? The transition issue. The last question.
I think that was the question I was responding to earlier.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
I'll just respond. Fidelis, I'll just respond to the last question of what incentives are being put in place by WWF to encourage private players to venture more in plastic recycling. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said, that by WWF being part of the global treaty, and in the global treaty, the specific issues that we are pushing to that respond to that are the issues of improving the compensation and remuneration of the people who are doing the recycling or reusing. So we are approaching it at that global level. And when we are fine with the document in place, then we can call upon our different countries to make the national commitments. So for now, we just want to ensure that the informal sector is well recognized and well compensated in its role in recycling, collections, and also creating new jobs for the young people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ritah. Thank you, dear participants, for your questions. Like I said, the discussion continues. So we have our links and addresses. You can write to us and you get more and more clarification and answers to some of your questions. So without much ado, I'm going to call on the Congo Basin Director, Dr. Martin Kabaluapa, for his closing remark. Thank you, Dr. Martin, for always being there. And we are so anxious to hear your closing remark. Maybe some big announcements will follow.
Thank you, Fidelis. This was really amazing as a 90-minute session on Earth Hour. WWF offices across the continent are busy with the Earth Hour activities. Just to mention a few, WWF Tanzania has set an inspiring precedent by embarking on a symbolic expedition to Mount Kilimanjaro, drawing attention to the concerning decline of snow cover on this iconic peak. Simultaneously, Uganda is advocating for a car-free day in Kampala, underscoring the importance of sustainable transportation. Across Central African Republic, Cameroon, Namibia, Gabon, Mozambique, Tanzania, and Madagascar, youth will be actively engaged in diverse and impactful activities aimed at nurturing a culture of conservation. From camping trips, eco-runs, and tree planting sessions to conferences, animation workshops, quizzes, digital campaigns, and beach cleanups, these initiatives exemplify the collective determination to safeguard our planet for future generations. To the members of the press who are present, please support your local WWF office by getting involved and covering their activities. If you would like to interview any of the speakers, please reach out to Deborah Weber. Deborah, please add your details in the chat so that members of the press can get your contact. Earth Hour is more than a moment. It is a movement that for the last 18 years has continued to inspire and mobilize people globally, reminding us of our collective responsibility to create a more healthful and resilient future for our planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. And we want to thank you all participants for joining from across the continent. And we wish you will continue with Earth Hour, the 23rd of March. Earth Hour Day, please join us to give the biggest R for Earth. Thank you very much, participants, and we'll keep the discussion flowing.